Well, there wouldn't have been a strike, and we would not now be at war with Iran. And I think the most important thing for your audience to understand is something that most Americans don't understand, George. The United States is now at war with Iran as Israel's critical and ultimately only real ally. It's very important to understand that because this is something that Israel, its lobby, and ultimately its agents in the United States have tried to bring on for 30 years. They've now achieved it, which explains why Mr. Netanyahu last night was almost giddy in his response. He knows that he's finally got what he wants because this war is going to expand. It's going to take time. How long is anyone's guess that it could have terrible consequences? So I think there was a failure at the policy-making level to understand what they were doing. And if you listen to Trump, this is not a man who wants the war. And so instead of a strike going in, even though this had been rehearsed for innumerable times over many years, even though they'd rehearsed it and practiced it, what they ultimately did was harm nothing and accomplish nothing. They hit the equivalent of empty buildings, empty targets. And then after doing so, he announced that he was now ready for peace, which is the ultimate expression of self-delusion. He now has a full-blown war on his hands. But until the Americans are hurt in some demonstrable way, most Americans will not understand this, and they don't understand it, George.
That's a big mystery. Of course, as I said in my monologue, the IAEA say there's no radioactive material in.
Use Ukraine as a military proxy to bring further harm to the people in Donbass and the people of Crimea.
In the atmosphere, there's no sign of emission. And so either there was no material there in the first place, or it did not succeed in getting anywhere near it. And the Israelis are beginning to say that now. Channel 13 this evening said that you cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program by bombs. In which case, why go to war with them?
Well, I tend to agree with you, but there are two things that are now very clear. Number one is that Iran is going to double down on its war with Israel. In fact, within the next 2 weeks, I'd be surprised if Israel is not entirely destroyed. Secondly, Iran is receiving and will continue to receive enormous amounts of aid and support, particularly from Russia and China. Three, the Iranians have now collectively decided to close the Straits of Hormuz. There are 50 oil tankers sitting in the Gulf, packed or filled with oil, ready to transport through the Straits of Hormuz. They're not going to move. They're going to sit there. They are now hostage to the closed straits. What are we in the United States going to do about that? Well, frankly, we don't draw on the oil from the Gulf for the most part. It's not going to make much difference to us, at least in the short run. But this is going to have a terrible impact on the rest of the world. There has been no thinking, once again, about the long-term strategic consequences. There was no thinking about, is this the right way to achieve the aim? Because if you're an Iranian right now, you're going to do everything in your power to build a nuclear weapon. In fact, I would argue that there will be countries all over the world that will now build nuclear weapons because they don't want to be visited by the United States Armed Forces in the middle of the night. We are the threat. We are the rogue state supporting the other rogue state, Israel. And then finally, no mention is being made in this country in any way, shape, or form of what's happening in Gaza. There's a complete failure to understand that Gaza is the catalyst for the larger war that's now going to begin against Israel. Every Muslim country is going to come on board against Israel, along with Russia, along with China. I'd be surprised if Mr. Putin doesn't make it very clear to Mr. Netanyahu that if he contemplates using a nuclear weapon, he needs to understand something. If you do this, if you use a nuclear weapon against Iran or anyone in the Middle East, we will use a nuclear weapon against you. I'd be very surprised if he has not already said that. We don't understand what we've walked into because we're not informed. We still think this is 1991. Listen to the rhetoric. I'm ready for peace now. We've made our point. We hope the Iranians understand us and will make peace. Have you lost your mind? The war is now just beginning.
Yes, it's not the beginning of the end, it's merely the end of the beginning, as Mr. Churchill said. Now, the impact of all this on Donald Trump's popularity, all the hypocrites are coming out. Nancy Pelosi is denouncing this lawless act of brigandry. All the Democrat hypocrites who would have done exactly the same thing. Of course, they represent nearly half of the American people. And therefore, how many of Trump's voters now desert him is going to be a huge factor in the midterms, isn't it? Its impact on MAGA is surely going to be significant, because this is a total about-face for the Donald Trump that people thought they were electing. This is the man who denounced the Iraq War, who denounced Obama, accused him of being ready to go to war with Iran in order to win an election. This is the Tulsi Gabbard who said just weeks ago that in terms there was no case for this kind of an action. When people do an about-face like that, they must lose a part of their base. How do you quantify that, Colonel?
Well, the desertions from so-called MAGA have already begun, because MAGA turns out to have been a myth. Let's be frank, it was never real. People voted for something that was never real. You've got to go back to the Republican National Convention. And during the Republican National Convention, there was a giant Israeli flag on the wall. And there was a placard above the flag that said, "Israel first." And then a gentleman walked out to the podium, ostensibly representing the Israel lobby, and tried to lead cheers for Israel first. Well, the response was tepid, to say the least. But the people that voted for Donald Trump didn't understand what they were listening to. The signal was unambiguous and clear. You were voting for Israel first. And that's what you got for a cabinet. That's what you got for a government. Now, as you point out, that applied equally to the other side, regardless of what the other side says. We have a government in Washington that is corrupt to its core. It's corrupt, it's ineffective, it's incompetent. And that's what we are now going to discover in the days and weeks and months ahead. The whole place is going to come apart, because this war is going to expand. The family dictatorships that control the Arabian side of the Persian Gulf are not going to survive this. The Saudis are at high risk. Why are they at high risk? Why is King Abdullah in Jordan at high risk? Because there are hundreds of millions of Muslim Arabs that are saying this is unacceptable. This must stop. And you're going to see new governments come online. We are going to lose everything as a result of this overseas. We are inevitably going to be driven out of the Middle East, the thing that everyone said we were fighting to prevent. And we're going to watch Israel be destroyed day after day after day. In other words, the world is going to be turned upside down. Everything that we've supposedly worked for decades will be lost. Now, in the long run, this is a damn good thing for us. We need to get out of these places. We need to come home. And we haven't even talked about the potential for really bad things to happen inside the United States. Set aside the very likely financial meltdown that is coming. As soon as we start to lose troops, men, people, ships, anything, you're going to see the stock market react very negatively. That's not just the market, but we have the bond market. You're going to watch the interest rates rise. We're going to try and suppress the inevitable inflation that results. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen. And as these things grow worse, the demand here at home for change in everything. Most important, change overseas. Come home. No more wars. That pressure is going to be overwhelming. Doesn't matter who is in Washington and what they say. They're all going to confront this. So this is in the language of fools in Washington, a game changer, as though this were a game. This is a strategic sea change. We don't get it, and we're not going to get it until all of the bad things happen that are coming. And by the way, There are a lot of people that are in the intelligence business that are professional who are now worried about terrible things happening here inside the United States. Our borders were open for years, George. We don't know who's in the country. We have people worried about the explosion of a dirty bomb inside our borders. And we should be worried, extremely worried. But until these things happen, the American people will not really wake up. They may walk away from Donald Trump and say, what a mistake we made, but they're not going to demand real action until they're hurt. That's coming.
As the meme says, doesn't matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. Do you think there was any real opposition inside the leadership on this, or was that too deception?
I have trouble believing anything that comes out of the government these days. I have to be frank. And there's an awful lot of theater that goes on to try and entertain people and make them think something's happening that isn't. These people are feckless. They don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand what they've done. There's not a shred of humanity in any of them. One look at Gaza alone should be enough to drive people completely out of the region and say, no more. No more cooperation, no collaboration against anyone with Israel until Gaza stops. It never comes up. It's not on television. And if it's not on television for most Americans, it probably doesn't exist.
Finally, Colonel, and here I draw on your diplomatic and other skills. If I were a Russian leader, and Mr. Witkoff, say, or Mr. Rubio came to talk with me, I would have difficulty keeping a straight face as they made commitments or expressed intentions, because I would say, I've just watched you in real time deceive your own people, deceive the world about your true intentions with regard to Iran. Isn't this a potential death blow to American credibility diplomatically?
Absolutely. No one believes anything we say anymore. So that would be a complete waste of time. No one believes that we can be trusted any longer. This is a death blow for that purpose. In the meantime, though, the Russians are bearing down on Kiev. Large numbers of their troops are moving offensively to the west. They're going to cross that river. They will move on Kiev, and they will move south towards Odessa. That's a foregone conclusion. And they can do that while they simultaneously support and assist Iran. I guess Russia just isn't as weak, backward, and incompetent as everybody said. And by the way, neither is Iran.
No, absolutely correct. But what about China? Might this be an opportune time for China to make a move on reunification with Taiwan?
China doesn't have to do that. Taiwan will voluntarily join China. That's a lot of nonsense. Neither the Chinese on Taiwan nor the Chinese on the mainland are interested in going to war with anybody for any reason. They're all about business. Their long-term goal is to end up looking a lot like Singapore. That's their model. This is not a warlike nation by any stretch of the imagination. You know, somebody was telling me the other day, doesn't President Trump understand the reason so many of our ships are so rusty is that they are at sea all the time? He keeps pointing to the Chinese ships, says they're not rusty. Well, of course they're not rusty because they spend most of their time in port. Well, if you spend most of your time in port as a Navy, how good are you? You know, the Chinese are not interested in a war. That's all crap. But the Chinese are very interested in doing business. And you pointed to BRICS. And you pointed to the one belt, one road. And you're 100% correct. Iran is vital and essential to that project. And it's also vital and essential to Russian national security because it touches the soft underbelly of Russia, which is Central Asia. Iran is not going to be allowed to lose. There will be no defeat of Iran. So if we double down on this, as I'm sure we'll try to do, we won't have any choice because we're going to be the recipients of retaliation. It's not going to work.